What's up, y'all, and welcome into the Jack Vita Show. I'm your host, as always, Jack Vita, coming to you from Mesa, Arizona, out here for spring training. And I've been really busy. For those that are not following me as it relates to stuff outside of the world of reality TV, you might not know, I'm a sports reporter, and I've been writing for MLB.com. So I've been extremely busy with spring training. And I also wrote something for the Baltimore Sun the other day. Did a little feature on Corbin Burns and his decision to come over to the Diamondbacks and leave the Orioles. He reflected on his time in Baltimore. So with all of that said, I've actually been quite busy lately. I haven't had a lot of time to do these podcasts. And unfortunately, this week there was no time for Stephanie and I to get a recap episode recorded. Huge bummer. It's really my busy season right now, so my apologies that there's no recap this week. However, we do have an exit interview, and we're going to speak with the 9th contestant eliminated from Deal or No Deal Island, the 6th place finisher, Mr. Dickson Wong. It's going to be a lot of fun. We look forward to chatting with him. If you guys are new to this channel, or maybe you're not, hit subscribe. Make sure you hit subscribe here on YouTube, and then follow us the Jack Vita Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. You can follow me on social media at Jack Vita Show. We're going to speak with Dickson here in a second about his gameplay, and he's going to spill the tea on some Deal or No Deal Island stuff. So let's bring him in. At this time, I'd like to welcome in the latest contestant eliminated from Deal or No Deal Island. It is Mr. Dickson Wong from Illinois, Wood River, right? Wood River,
Illinois, small town in the middle of nowhere. So
I'm glad we got a couple of you small town Midwestern boys, you and Luke.
Yeah. You know, I love growing up in a small town. Even if I was to win the money, I wasn't going to be moving anytime soon. You know, I love the small town vibe. I love the, you know, everyone in the area kind of feeling. So I love being a small towner, you know.
Dickson, why am I talking to you today? What went wrong for you? What was your downfall?
You know, I've said this in all my other interviews. My downfall, and I'll admit it was my fault, was choosing David next. And, you know, I see a lot of people, they're like, you should have chose Lete over David. And it's like, I shouldn't even have chose Lete next. My best option to pick was CK. That was the most neutral option. And if I would have chose CK next, you know, there's 3 total safety cases available, right? So I get one of them. CK most likely goes for the red one, which means David or Parvati would get the other one. And, you know, by that, one of those guys would be at the bottom with me. And I think if Lete faced the banker, she would have taken out Lete or David over me, or Parvati or David over me. So I think my biggest downfall was choosing David next. But I think, you know, I couldn't think at the time, unfortunately. One thing about me is I think about my mistakes, and that was a huge mistake, not being able to get across the balance beam, you know, and I shouldn't even say mistake. My failures is something I always think about. And I think it got the best of me, because if I was able to think, you know, on my toes, I would have been able to pick CK next. And I really believe if I would have done that, I would have been sitting at the end. Because one of my strategies coming in was to always have 2 threats in the game, just in case I was in a situation where I'm sitting on the bench and there's other people up for elimination, they would most likely go for them over me. And I think that strategy worked. It's just that I wasn't able to, unfortunately, get David or Parvati on the bottom with me. So
you mentioned the excursion. Do you think you would have rocked that challenge a little better if you had gotten to see how David went through it? Because it seemed like once he set that example, then everyone just kind of did the same thing.
No, I think for sure David broke the challenge, you know. I mean, I didn't know he was an Australian Survivor player then, but that's where his experience kicked in. And I do believe that if I would have picked anyone else other than David, probably Parvati knew how to get across it. They would have had the same results as me, where 3 people were pulling them out of quicksand. So it definitely sucks that I went first. I felt like I was kind of the guinea pig in that. If I was to go after David, I do think I could have done it, but I do think I would have been kind of like Philip and CK, where it would have been, seconds that I had left.
Did you have a plan to eventually turn on Parvati and David? Was that the goal at some point in the game, or were you just going to ride through with them to the end?
I mean, I'm always going to say this. Hindsight's 2020. I didn't get to the next round, unfortunately. But at 5, I wanted to face the banker already to take out Lete. I put that entire plan into motion to blindside Lete. Fortunately, it didn't work out for me. But assuming that it's me, David, Parvati, Philip, and CK left, I would want to turn on David at 5 was my plan. I'll be honest with you. I never planned on turning on Parvati because I felt like I could beat her in a challenge. And I even told her one night, like, I'm not worried about you because I think I could take you in a challenge. So there's no need to get rid of you. So ideally, Parvati, and it might have been my downfall in the game, assuming I do get past this round and it is me and Parvati left. It might have been my downfall in the game, but that's the honest truth of what I'm saying. I planned on sticking with Parvati to the end. And if it wasn't Parvati, it was CK.
Did you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar trying to play both sides?
Oh yeah, I got caught like day 2. I didn't even get caught. It wasn't even like I got caught. It's like, no, I got caught like day 2 trying to play all the sides. And that's why, I felt like at the time I had to play with the family because no one else was willing to trust me. And in their eyes, it's like, they played, and I didn't know David, again, was an Australian Survivor player. But at the time, Parvati, and I'm assuming David was thinking the same thing, was thinking no one wanted to work with me because I was going around telling everyone that I wanted to work with them, and that I was the perfect third member in their alliance. So, but I did get caught fairly early, unfortunately. I wasn't good at playing the angles there.
So you made some mention a little bit. I mean, it seemed that you were someone who was a fan of reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that start for you? When did you get into the genre? And what shows were you really into?
Yeah, so I started watching Big Brother when I was in high school. That was a show people were talking about. I was like, oh, it sounds interesting to me, so I'll give it a shot. Absolutely loved it. I started on season 16. I've watched every season since. I've gone back and I've watched a few. And then same thing for Survivor too. Me and my PE teacher, we would always talk about Survivor. He got me hooked on the show. And it's the same situation. I think I started on Survivor though. Game Changers. It was trying to think the one with Ashley, Nolan, Devin, Ben, the one
Heroes versus Healers
Heroes
versus
versus
Hustlers.
Healers
Yeah.
versus Hustlers. Yeah. That's the one I started on, but I went back and watched some of the other seasons. I've watched Parvati play. I knew she was a great player, but the one thing I will say about Parvati is that she was always a loyal player. So I wasn't worried about her cutting my neck at any point. She rode with Russell to the end in Heroes versus Villains. She stuck true to Amanda and Suri. So, one thing that I will say about Parvati was she was a loyal player, so I didn't at any moment think she would cut me. If I really was her, like, number one person.
The show really made it look like the other group of players were targeting you guys like really early on before they even knew who Parvati was, or maybe some of them said they knew, but they weren't telling anybody. Why was that? Why were you guys in the minority from the start?
We're definitely in the minority, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it was me that was always getting targeted. Like David and Parvati was always safe. I was always at the bottom having to scrape my way up. But I felt like they targeted Parvati. They saw how great Boston Rob did his first season. And David, no one knew David played Australian Survivor other than Parvati, but David was just this physical threat. And, I'll be honest with you, through the first couple days, I didn't even think he would make it to final 6 because of how big of a threat he was, which is why in the axe throwing challenge, I actually had him in my lower part of the lineup of being a threat to win the game. Because that's how I did mine, was who was most likely to win the game compared to who was a threat currently. Because, the one thing in that challenge is that everyone had a different way of ranking people. You had Dr. Will's way of just doing it everyone alphabetically but himself. I know MG told me she did hers by allies. CK, I think, did hers by threats in the game currently. And I did mine by who I thought was going to win the game. Is how I did mine. So
you mentioned that you got caught with your hand in the cookie jar, like on day 2.
Yeah.
How'd you out yourself? Was it the storm move? Was it before that?
So I think other people, Storm picked up that I was playing multiple people. He came up to me one day. He's like, have you been talking to anyone? I'm like, oh, no one at all. He's like, what about Lete? I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe, because him and Lete were comparing notes. I really got caught though in the axe challenge. There was one scene that I guess didn't make it. where Dr. Will asked everyone who I had a final two with, and everyone raised their hands there, unfortunately. So if I could go back now, obviously, I don't think that was a flaw necessarily in the game. Like, yeah, sure, no one would work with me, but I did get like other allies in David and Parvati. And I personally feel like it was better to be on Parvati's side than against her at that point in the game. So
yeah, kind of what you're talking about. It seems like those two were big threats. They wanted them out, but they were always safe. So then you became the next person that they went after.
Yeah, unfortunately. So
would you do that over again? Would you have tried it differently if you're playing again?
Well, if I played again, obviously I wouldn't play as fast. That was my biggest problem. You know, you watch the show at home, you're like, oh, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't do that. But the game is very, very slow when you're on the island. You don't have anything to pass time. And for me, the one thing that I wanted to do more than anything was just talk game with people. Like, the game was always on my mind. And one thing too that, you know, didn't make it on TV was I had an allergic reaction night one, which basically knocked me out for the entire night. So I had no idea what was going on that night, who was talking to who. I didn't know if alliances were already being made. So waking up the next day, I gunned hard for those alliances because I had no idea, again, what happened that night, because I was knocked out. I had IVs in me, Benadryl in me, and it was a rough first night for me on the Banker's private island.
Sounds like a lot of people got sick. I heard Dr. Will was sick. Did anyone else get sick?
So I think out of anyone, you know, it's not going to show. I think I became really good friends with the medic. I mean, I visited him not only for that scene, but my leg got pretty scraped up in the one challenge. I hit so many rocks, and David turns around trying to come get me. He hit so many rocks. I had the Panama cough in Panama, which lasted all the way up till December. I'm still coughing even a little bit now. Lachelle was sick at one point. Everyone was getting it. So it was definitely a little rough for all of us there.
What was something that wasn't shown on TV that you were surprised was not shown that may have added a little more context and clarity to some of the situations that unfolded?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, Jack. You know, one thing that I wish they did add, and again, I understand, you know, the show's not all about me. I understand that. And you got to include other elements to give, you know, kind of like a suspenseful ending, if that makes sense. But one thing that I would like to point out was the episode where it was me and Lachelle up for elimination. And the reason why I was upset with Parvati at the time was because I think she did have good intentions. She wanted to keep me safe. But I don't think she believed in my social game and the fact that I could possibly talk my way out of the situation. And don't get me wrong, you know, I burned a lot of bridges. I will say that. But the one thing I will say about Lachelle is that she was always open-minded, and she would always hear you out. So I felt like I was able to talk my way into Lachelle to not take me out if she was to face the banker. And the one thing it doesn't show is that me and Lachelle did make an agreement where we wouldn't take each other out. So I know she says it on the show, but we did make an agreement prior to Temple that she wasn't going to take me out. And for me, whenever I face the banker, I would only face the banker when I really needed to, because I didn't want to put my game on the line if it wasn't necessary. You know, whenever I faced the banker with Dr. Will, when Dr. Will nominated me, I wasn't for sure where I stood in the pack, just because I was playing all these different alliances and stuff like that. But you know, with the CK one, CK told me she wasn't taking me out. She didn't tell me directly, but she was hinting at Parvati she wasn't going to take me out. So I didn't feel like I needed to face the banker. I didn't think David would take me out, but I will say that was a very weird night. You know, a weird vibe night, kind of. And then I didn't face the banker with Lachelle because she told me she wasn't going to take me out. So, and you know, not to mention, we also had 4 good deals in a row. I think me, CK, Dr. Will, David. So, I mean, another thing that I did, which I don't know, what I like to do too, you know, with odds, because I know everyone's talking about the odds, is I like to look at it like, what is the likelihood of, you know, something happening 5 times in a row? And, you know, doing the math on that. And there's so many different variables. So it's not like 100%, 7%. But that's the answer I came up with. Because, you know, once you do all that math. But again, there's so many different variables. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But that's another way I looked at it, was that there was a very low chance of me getting a good deal that night. So, trying to think of anything else. Oh, another thing is going back to the episode too. A lot of people think I rode David and Parvati's coattails in the game, but I think one example of me not doing that is after that final 7 challenge where Lete threw me under the bus. David was really chill about it the next morning. He's like, listen, man, like sometimes you got to do what's best for mom's game. And you got to play the banker and take out Lete. And it's like, I'm not doing your guys' dirty work. Like there's no way I'm doing it. I got up immediately and just warmed off to the point where they got like a story producer and I was just yelling, I'm not playing David's game. I'm not playing Parvati's game. If she puts me up, I'm going to take out one of her closest allies in CK because the edit doesn't show that Parvati and CK are close. So, and I threatened Parvati with that too. If she did put me up, I was going to send home CK. Now, would I have done it? I'm not 100% sure at the time, but I did feel like me bluffing that a little bit would also help in not facing the banker.
Dickson, we're going to have to wrap up here in a second, but I got to ask you about your St. Louis Cardinals. I'm out at spring training right now. I'm in Arizona. I'm not in Florida spring training, but give me your outlook, your take on the Cardinals offseason, looking ahead to this year. Where do you think they're going to stack up in the NL Central? You know, as a diehard Cardinals fan, I always want to say they're going to finish in first place. I've said it every single year. But I am very disappointed that we didn't make any moves necessarily. We got rid of Paul Goldschmidt, which don't get me wrong. Like, yes, he was declining in age, but I felt like he was good for the leadership aspect of the clubhouse. I want to say we're going to win, but I think deep down inside, I know we're probably going to get third place, maybe second. So, but I'm always going to say, you know, I'm always going to root for the Cardinals, and I'm always going to say they're going to make the playoffs. So we'll say that they're going to win. I'll say win the wild card is what I'll say. Okay, I like the optimism. They probably should have traded Goldie and Arenado 2 years ago. That's what they probably should have done. I didn't want to get rid of either one of them, so I just wish they would have made some more starting, you know, maybe signed a starting pitcher or traded for one. I think that's our biggest weakness is our pitchers for sure. So he's Dickson Wong. We got a nice chance to chat today. Hopefully it's not the last time. Dickson, why don't you throw out your social media handles or anything that you'd like to plug or promote, point people over to? Yeah, so my Instagram is Dickson.Wong4. And that's the only social media I have, really. So awesome. Give him a follow, Dickson. Oh, look at those fireworks. Look at the fireworks. I love it. Perfect. Thank you so much, Dickson. This is great. It was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for having me on your show. All right, y'all. That concludes our conversation today with Mr. Dickson Wong. We will be back next week with another exit interview. So make sure you guys are all subscribed to the Jack Vita Show here on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. You can follow me on social media at Jack Vita Show. We'll have more content coming soon. And until then, I'm Jack Vita. Bring in the dancing lobsters.